our next panel to join us on stage. Reflecting the broader theme of today's conference today, the next panel will be discussing how to harness again big data and analytics for smart and responsive government. I'd like to first invite Mrs. K. Ganga, who is the Director General, the International Center for Information Systems and Audit, to join us here on stage, please. I usually like to sometimes also, since there are people in the room and our panelists who are dear to us and who've been at our previous engagements as well, I'd like to dispense with a slightly formal introduction and also introduce Mrs. Ganga as a person for whom the subject is very close to her heart. And we've had her speak on this before. She has worked with the Unique Identification Authority of India as Deputy Director General Finance before, and she will be talking to us about something that she holds very dear. Welcome, ma'am. I'd like to now invite on stage Mr. Rajesh Agarwal, who is the Secretary, Department of IT, Government of Maharashtra. Again, whenever we speak of e-governance, and especially in India, whenever we are talking about databases, whenever we are talking about doing more with databases than we often do, I think Mr. Agarwal's name keeps popping up always. And I'm sure, again, as I said, some of the audience does not need an introduction to him. And we are very thankful that he's here with us today. Thank you so much, Mr. Agarwal. I'd like to now invite Ms. S.M. Apparajan, who is the Director, Economics and Statistics, Government of Maharashtra. She has been with the department for the last 4 years and has looked at the economic census and has held important assignments like the first State Finance Commission, Cotton Monopoly Scheme, Credit Specialist for World Bank aided projects, Human Development, and has also worked on a UNDP project for strengthening state plan for human development and scheme evaluation. As always, last but not the least, I'd like to request Professor T.C. Anand, who is Secretary and Chief Statistician of India, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation at the Government of India. Professor Anand has taught colleagues of mine. He's been with the Delhi School of Economics as a professor for many years, and he holds a PhD from Cornell University, is a very widely published economist, and he also is, interestingly, the second Chief Statistician of India after our Chief Guest, Dr. Pranab Sen, and he currently holds that position. And I thank you so much for joining here today. And definitely, Mr. Sudipto K. Sen, who is our chair for the session today. Please, sir. I now hand over this discussion in the very capable hands of Mr. Sen. All yours, sir.
Thank you. Good evening. It's indeed my privilege today to be moderating such eminent panelists who are on this dais. Each one of them you have heard their introduction, and therefore without really getting into too further, may I now invite Professor Anand to share your thoughts, specifically considering that we heard from Dr. Pranab Sen how it is so important today to look at analytics in many different areas, and views of Dr. Anand would be really valuable at this juncture.
It's a pleasure to be here, and it's also a pleasure to follow Pranab in this discussion as in other things. In fact, he's made my task much easier in what I'm going to say. I don't have a great deal to say, but I do want to emphasize a few points about data and analytics in government. But before I do that, I think it's useful to sort of give a sense of perspective. I'm sure many of you here in this room, are a generation who were educated in a different world. Let me try to explain this. When I went to do my PhD, by which time I'd finished my master's in India, we had never even seen a computer. Even though I was a student of econometrics and had a lot of my coursework in statistics and econometrics at the Delhi school, I know there was this computer center at Delhi school, but it was out of bounds to undergraduates and master students. I mean, we all knew that there was this thing and these people used to go in and do something there. And I landed up in the US because I had done so much econometrics. I was able to waive all the early requirements in the graduate school, and I was join up for the main graduate program in econometrics. So the first class, our instructor gave us an assignment which was basically a link to a large data set and a whole bunch of questions on it, and said, go and do this. I sort of looked like, how somebody would feel if he was parachuted into a different planet. You walk into the computer center and it's the sense of fear. I think Preeti mentioned this thing about the fear of technology. You realize what it is like. It so happened that was the year in which people date the beginning of the information technology revolution. It was 1980, the first IBM PC was introduced, and the world started to change. Everybody became very familiar with data. Government of India, in lots of things, reacted slowly, and it adapted. It too changed. What we have seen is enormous. I mean, in the time I finished my PhD, I taught in the US for a few years. By the time I came back, India had distinctly started to change. The most visible example was the year I came back in purchasing railway tickets. I always point that out as being probably the most striking effect of how technology has affected our behavior. When we were students, buying a railway ticket was an arcane science. You needed to have friends or touts who would arrange the ticket for you. And now all of us can do it sitting at home, or maybe using your mobile phone. It's as simple as that. So technology has made a difference in a large number of ways. But there is a tendency, and this is where I'm going to link my talk to what Sen is saying, is it has a deceptive feel to it that it can solve all problems, and you can, so to speak, ignore the nuts and bolts of ordinary governance in trying to understand data and how to use it. And I will illustrate this example by a few caveats and then talk a little bit about issues. The first thing is something which Pranav said. Pranav had said that government has many tasks, and he called it in terms of his 4 great parameters of identification, interventions, monitoring, evaluation, whatever. And each one of them has different data requirements. That was very clearly stated. But what we did not say, and I will now state for you, is that there is another implication. The data generated for one of those purposes does not readily lend itself to a data for another purpose. The best example of this dissonance in India today is the use of the data on poverty. We are one of the sources for behind that data, so this tends to create this problem. The poverty data was principally generated for the purpose of description. It was a way to identify a problem for which it did a very good job. In the years when it was first developed, the way it was calculated, it was a stark portrayal of the way our country was. In 1973, it pointed out to the nation that 60% of the people did not meet a very minimal standard of living. It was perfect for that purpose. But at some point, they decided to use unmodified, with exactly the same structure, the same set of data for intervention, which is a very different requirement. The consequences are available to all of you in the public domain. And the discomfort between the people talking from two different perspectives and their inability to comprehend the other's problem is because of this simple misapplication of a data and an indicator generated in one use being transferred to another. And this is something which is the first part which we have to be very careful about. Now, which means that for the user, he has to become a lot more literate about the data which is being presented to him. He must understand where does it come from. I used to start my statistics classes with the emphasis that the critical thing which you have to know if you want to be a good user of data is to understand the data generating process. The problem with modern technology, and I mean this is partly the problem with the analytics revolution to some extent, and I may be therefore speaking at a little of a tangent from what everybody else is going to be saying, is an inadequate appreciation about how the data comes about. And that is central to understanding how to use it. We need to pay a lot more attention to the mechanics through which data is generated. The mechanics determine which uses it can be put for. So that's the first cautionary note I want to strike. The second point I think is important to understand is we talk about the statistics ministry and my colleagues here from the directorates as if we are generators of data. Most of the time we are actually not really the generators of data. We are ourselves users. We are often the first user of data. Where does the data come from? There is no great mystery about it. Data in government and in official statistics, we have ways of describing it, come from two ways. Some data we do generate. I'm not sort of, when I said that we are not generators of data, we do conduct surveys, we conduct censuses and so on, we do generate data. But a large part of data comes out of the business of government. Government functions, in the process of functioning, it generates information. It is the statistician who applies his skills to that information and converts it to data. But this is the problem, that very often the statistician does not get sufficient say in how this information should be generated. The big challenge of big data, and government is now generating volumes of information. Ever since the information technology has taken place and what Pranav pointed out, the really good MISs which have come up, the amount of information which government departments are creating is massive. But the challenge for us is to ensure that this information can be converted to data, which comes back to the basic principles of statistics. We have to talk about principles by which data can be integrated. The necessary classification, codification are provided into that. Definitions and concepts are harmonized so that the particular terminology used in different generating locations are the same. These are principles which the statisticians understand, and what gets needed is a need to incorporate statistical thinking into government. Now, the challenge in big data is, for the most part, what Pranav called the silos, that there were different departments. One of those departments, unfortunately, is statistics, now, which becomes a problem. If you have 4 program departments and 1 department of statistics, the 4 program departments are often innocent about the principles through which statistics data is supposed to be generated. The fact is, if you wish to make it into big data, all of those departments have to become statisticians. They all have to incorporate and internalize these basic principles into their functioning. Then there are issues of ensuring or understanding the structure through which data comes in. And I'll close with this point because it's something which we don't pay enough attention to. Data is collected in government records for a purpose. It's important that the purpose for which it is collected is not lost sight of, and when its use is transferred to other purposes, care is taken that it does not compromise the original purpose. I am stating in a somewhat long-about way a principle which is enunciated in the Collection of Statistics Act, which assures, for example, all participants in government surveys and censuses confidentiality to the user, that the data will not be used in a manner detrimental to their use. Now, this principle carries over to other forms of data generation as well. People may disclose information to government for purposes. I may disclose to a hospital that I have certain ailments with the understanding that I will get treated. If this information is shared, for example, to design policy on where should certain employment targets be located, I may be very reluctant in future to share my ailment information with the hospital if it means I'm not going to get a job. I'm stating this because these principles are fundamental to the structures through which data is shared. There are methods by which we can ensure that this security, if you like, is offered. But discussing what this security entails, sometimes in lay parlance, these are the concerns which privacy experts raise. Privacy simply means, in this case, and the way to define it is that individuals reveal information to government for a purpose. Its use in subsequent purposes must not be in a manner which will contradict the original purpose nor impede the revelation for that original purpose. As long as these safeguards are built in, you can figure out mechanisms for data sharing. But these are the sorts of controls which we will need to develop if we wish to move from silos into larger data systems. I'm highlighting these. Hopefully I can elaborate some of these in discussion or questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rajan. Very interesting and revealing type of observation, especially in the area of data privacy, and also the issue which you touched upon, that usage of the data for which it was intended for versus where else it could be put together. I think striking a decent balance between the fact that the original purpose should not be lost. At the same time, if it could be used effectively elsewhere also, it should be used with the caveat that privacy issue is not kind of compromised. So I think that's a great observation and thought which you brought up. May I now invite Mrs. Ganga to unite? Sure.
Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts of mine on this topic. Preeti at the very beginnings was mentioning about Dr. Pranab Singh being a little late and was suggesting that it was a good opportunity for emphasizing the need for big data analysis and how it could have helped avoid such a situation. So when she said that, I just felt very happy because she gave me an opportunity to narrate 2 illustrations to prove this point. And this is something which I was just wondering how to bring it into the discussion today. And now I've got an opportunity to do that. And so I'll start with something which, before narrating those illustrations, I just want to mention how I'm standing here today. And again, I would just take a word off from something which Dr. Pranab Sen mentioned. He said that he felt inadequate being here for giving the keynote address. And I think I feel utterly inadequate being here because I'm neither a person who is dealing with technology. I have no such background, and nor have I been dealing with big data of the kind that Dr. Pranab Sen has been dealing with, or Professor Anand has been dealing with. But the reason why I'm here today, and I think that is probably a good enough reason for being here, is that my experience with the Unique Identification Authority of India, that gave me an opportunity to see big data for the first time in my life. And data up close and actually literally sort of hold and feel data, that kind of opportunity I had got. And also the way the data was being used and analyzed and what purposes it was serving. So I'm going to briefly link that up to the topic. The other reason why, another thing which I feel was something which makes me feel that I could probably be the right person here for talking to you today, is that I belong to the Comptroller and Auditor General's office, and in the Auditor General's office, either hold a lot of data or get access to a lot of data. And the fact that we hold a lot of data, but something which we haven't really understood and appreciated in the way that big data, when we use the term big data, means, I just briefly like to talk about that because the revelations have come now after my exposure to the work in UIDI, and that giving me an opportunity to deal with people dealing with technology. So not only that, and the third thing which brings me here is that I'm currently the Director General of the Information Systems, International Center for Information Systems and Audit. And as a part of my mandate, I'm required to help with collecting legacy data sets and also of creating test beds for doing data analysis and for showing and telling our department people and people from other audit institutions across the globe as to how they can use data for doing their audit activities. So these three things put together have made me become very passionate about the idea of data and big data. So now I'll talk about the illustration which I'm dying to talk about. Recently I read a book by Victor Mayer-Schonberger and Kenneth Kukia, both of who have written a book called Big Data, and that book is still something which I carry around with me because it's a narration of amazingly interesting examples of big data. And one of the things that he talks about, and this is way back in the year 1839, when there was a naval officer, a Commander Maury, who, because of some accident, on his way to joining his the people on the naval ship could not, and he became physically incapacitated, got a little crippled, because of which he was taken off from naval duty, and he was put in a department of charts and instruments, and which otherwise people would have thought that it's a big come down for him, but that changed his life altogether. It was exactly the kind of place he wanted to be in. It was a place where there were these musty boxes and boxes of log data of people, of the captains who travel in the ships, the naval ships, who would log every time the data about the wind and the wind and the temperature and all the other weather conditions and the lat longs of the places that they would travel. So he put all this together and he created these charts, and he created sectors of every 5 degrees of lat long. He created sectors and put all this data, voluminous data, and once he did all that, he was actually able to show how we could use different paths for traversing the high seas. And because he could find that certain months of the year or certain times of the year, there were certain currents which would take your ships to unsafe territories, or certain ways of going into certain places where the wind currents would favor you and take you faster to some other locations. So this data which he put together completely altered the way that ships started traversing when they were crossing the Atlantic Ocean. So this was a time when there was no digitization of data. It was hard paper data which he would use, and he had, I think, shown the way for the first use of big data and using data analytics for a very good purpose. And so this, if Dr. Pranab Sen had about the routes and traffic of reaching a place, he would probably, there would be Commander Murray showing him better paths to come to the center without losing much time. And another example, which again Kukier and Schomburger talk about, which is again a very interesting example, and this is again a big use of big data, is the data which the United States Postal Service people put to. Again, amazing amount of data which they put on the UPS trucks which would carry the mail. And these things were fitted with lots of sensors for the GPS capturing the information and sharing and information bases with the other truckers so that they knew where what is going and which routes are crowded, which routes are shorter. And based on all that, they actually managed to do something that over a period of a year, UPS was able to, over a period of I think 2009 to 2011, I'm forgetting the dates, but they managed to shave off 30 million 30 million miles of travel data, and they were also able to take off reduce their consumption of petrol by 3 million gallons of petrol, and they were able to also take off 30,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions in the air. And this was again using data. So these illustrations are just basically to tell you how, the kind of thing that I want the audience here to think about data. While Dr. Pranab Sen spoke and Professor Anand spoke about how government data is there and how statisticians use it and how it can be put to different users, how you should analyze it and what care you should do. I'm talking about something which is completely on a different scale. I'm talking about messy data. I'm talking about data which is unstructured. I'm talking about unstructured data. Today I chose not to use a PowerPoint presentation because I wanted it to remain unstructured, so that I could just narrate some instances about how big data can be of it. And what I just want to get the message today is that what I would really appreciate is that everyone in government, if they are able to either evolve or develop or cultivate a big mindset, big data mindset, I think that is the beginning of use of data, and it is the beginning of data analytics. And it is, I think, SaaS, people who have come here, the hope that government departments will buy your SaaS products. I think first before that, I think they should use the government data which is already available in the public domain and show what that data can be used. And then I think the people who are holding the data will probably be tempted to either buy it or engage consultants to actually start doing data analytics themselves. So this brings me to the next topic that I would like to just briefly touch about, or which I want to talk about, is about data in public domain, putting out open data. And again here, I would just like to talk about how Barack Obama, when he became the President of America, the very next day, he took out a presidential memorandum telling every federal agency that they should start putting out data in the public domain. And he said that when in the face of doubt, the openness prevails. That's what he said. So in other words, I think what I would like to tell my friends here who are coming from government and who are holders of data or have access to data, I think it would be a great idea that all of you think about how well you can start putting data out in the open domain, and then let everybody use it. Even if you cannot use it beyond the original use for which you created the data, even if you put it out there, there would be lots of other people who could reuse that data which you have collected for some particular purpose. And the point that Professor Anant mentioned about is that yes, you collect data for a particular use, but it may have some other uses for some other purposes in some other manner. And here again, I'd like to bring out another very interesting illustration and an example. The founder of CAPTCHA or reCAPTCHA, all of you, I think the audience here doesn't need to be told what it's all about. What he did was he came out with this way of bringing out these squiggles of numbers and alphabets, which now I think almost all of us who use internet to access or do some internet activity, financial, or try to get access to some private data which we use through the internet, we do it. Basically that is to say that it is a human and not a computer which is trying to use it. So there he came out with that. So that was the original purpose, what the CAPTCHA was devised for that. But interestingly, it became the basis of something completely interesting and different use that it was put to. Those squiggles and the way it was done started being used by those who had this big data mindset, decided, wow, this is an interesting way, I could use this data for something else. And they use this data to basically do all these transcriptions of information which is available and put it to another use. So you're using something for something else. So reuse of data would be a great idea. And similarly, data exhausts. And while you are using data, you also have so much of other data which comes along with that, there's a byproduct of some data which comes out, which can be used for something else. And here again, I mean, Kukier and Berger keep coming back to me because of the wonderful examples that they keep narrating in their book. They talk about the name of, I think he's called Professor Koshimizu. He actually studied a lot of data about the posteriors of people. And this was very interesting. He took 360 data points from people when they sit, what is kind of, and he found out that each one is unique in the way in which the kind of pressures they put when they take a sitting position. And this information, this data which he collected over several people, he used and analyzed that data for basically coming out with a method of an anti-theft device for people who drive cars. So the car is not stolen. If somebody else is sitting in a car which has actually been used to the kind of pressure points which they have put for what is unique to you, and if somebody else sits in, then it doesn't work. So now what has that actually happened? Well, that was the original use. But there's something else also they decided that we can use this for something else. So what was the other idea that came about it? The other idea that came about this was that, okay, so if a person is in a sitting down position, this is the kind of pressure points that he would place on the chair that he sits. But while he is driving, it's also quite possible that because of fatigue or something, he may just sort of nod off or change of position or move around and things like that, and therefore maybe cause accidents. So then came the use of the same information for safety purposes. So the examples are innumerous about how you could use data and analyze data. So the idea over here of big data is not really big as in several terabytes or megabytes of data, I mean like petabytes of data, but just taking all the data that is available and using that to come to some conclusions. And there are any number of ways, and I think the people who are taking decisions, they talk about using data for policy intervention, deciding policies or taking certain decisions for which you need data. In our country, we have a lot of data which unfortunately is not yet got digitized, and therefore the question of datafication, that is taking it to the next stage, also hasn't happened. But you need the big data mindset to think that data is valuable and that it can be used. And here again, another interesting anecdote that I want to narrate is about a friend of mine who mentioned about a company wanting to set up a particular factory which needed a lot of water. They needed water, but they were looking at places where they decided, for instance, to set it up in Vidarbha, and they wanted to know whether there was enough water available, and there was no information about the groundwater table, how much of water is there. So they came out with some interesting method of getting information. So what did they do? They went to that village, to the local hardware or plumber store, which sells pump sets and pipes for digging your bore wells, and then figured out that in this particular village, 3 pump sets were sold and some, let us say, 1,000 meters of pipe were sold. And so they said, okay, so that means 3 pump sets use 1,000 meters, so they went this low deep, and therefore the groundwater is there, this place, and then decided that this was not a good enough thing to set up their factory. And this became the method by which they actually were able to predict drought conditions in several other places in Maharashtra after that, for which was very interesting. So the point over here is that now this became a proxy for the real data. The real groundwater table data is not available, so they use something else. So there are examples galore, and the data is valuable. The data is something which we should all learn to use. And I think the rest of the points which can come out during the course of our discussion. But just before I end, because I have to mention something about my mini data UID experience, I will just mention also about how we used it over there, the data. There, we did a couple of things. One is, of course, we had built in the method of collection of data, we collected a lot of metadata, which was like, for instance, for every person who was getting enrolled, we were collecting information about who was the operator who was doing it, what was his Aadhaar number, and what was the GPS coordinates where he was actually conducting that enrollment, and in that particular application which was being used, how much time we are spending on every screen to collect the data information, and so what's the total time that he's doing, when was this the client, thick line which he was using in the application, when did he sync it with our data from our CIDR, and when are they uploading the data from our CIDR. Based on all this, UIDAI does an amazing array of data analytics, which tells us which operator is not keeping to quality standards. If, for instance, it's found that he moved from screen to screen in just a couple of seconds, he moved from one screen to another, then you can assume that the quality of his data which he was putting in there was poor, and therefore you take up those data tablets for further detailed quality scrutiny and quality assurance checks. And or you would find that they have been capturing, done the enrollment today, but they are uploading the data only, let us say, 100 days later. So then you were capturing that information so that you could actually put penal provisions and make sure that their client freezes if they do not upload within 10 days or 15 days, whatever limits which we fix. So this data was being used in any number of ways. I mean, and we do it continuously, and in our every monthly meetings, the data analytics team, the BI and data analytics team puts out data which they have come about, which they have been able to come by sitting with all this data, which could improve the efficiency of the UIDAI's performance. So they can do it faster, they can do it more efficiently, and they can do it with greater quality. I mean, these are very small examples, but this is about the amazing stuff of great data. But finally, I just again want to end on another interesting bit of information which will tell you what the value of big data is all about. Everybody knows about Facebook, and everybody probably over here is also a Facebook user. Now, when Facebook went public last year and what happened was the day before, the value of it, each share was going for $34, and the total market capitalization value on that particular night when it was going public was $104 billion US dollars, which is the combined market capitalization value of Boeing, General Motors, and Dell Computers put together. And what does this mean? It means that Facebook, which has assets, which is like computers, network equipment, etc., which is only about 6.3 billion, but their market value is 104 billion, which means that about 100 billion is the value of the data that they own. In other words, the 2.3 trillion likes which every one of us put on that Facebook was valuable data. So every time people say, I like something, it's about 5 cents worth. And each one of you, if you are putting likes so often, that means each of you have been contributing $100 worth to the value of Facebook. So the point why I want to end with this is that its data is priceless. It is so valuable, and I think all of us over here should recognize this and try to make it available to everybody to use it and to analyze it to improve the efficiency of government performance. Thank you.
Ganga, thank you very much for bringing out some very interesting anecdotes as well as situations which really point out to one fact. When we talk of innovation, innovation actually comes out from many different areas. And hence, beneath the big data, there is so much of innovation which is sitting behind, which could be made use of, which could change the face of an individual, a community, including a country. And such examples are galore. I could probably give you one example which may not be directly relating to a government business, but this happened with General Motors. See, in automobiles, when you have an issue with the warranty, that could be very, very expensive, because every day automobile company is manufacturing hundreds and thousands of cars which are going out in the marketplace, and recall becomes a very expensive proposition. Also, it has an issue in terms of eroding the reputation of the company. So General Motors had that problem, and guess whom they looked at? Not another company like Toyota or whatever else. They looked at the Center of Disease Control. The Center of Disease Control would do things to find out that during the midday meal which people were distributing in their schools, or to check if there was anything which resulted in food getting spoiled. They wanted to catch at the earliest possible time, and that was done in hours. So they followed the same process, put it out there in their manufacturing process of the car, and they could reduce the issue of locating what is called the root cause in a much shorter time than what probably it was happening. So see from where came the answer to their solution, which was not necessarily from what the data was sitting within their own domain. So I think essentially it proves a point that today we have a huge opportunity to kind of make use of that. So thank you, ma'am, for all those interesting insights. May I now request Mr. Rajesh Agarwal, if you'd like to use the mic out there, you are welcome to do so, to share your thoughts.
These days, too many conferences are happening on big data. Only last week I and Dr. Anand were there in some other hotel for some other conference. But are data-driven decisions, are they really better than decisions taken by gut feeling? We must ponder and ask ourselves this question. Life's biggest 3 decisions. First, आप किस देश में पैदा हुए, किसके घर पैदा हुए? It's not in your hands. Which kind of career you take? Is it really data driven? Please ask yourself. Was it a data driven decision? Third, किससे शादी किया? Was it really data driven? Was it love at first sight or second sight, or was it arranged marriage? Similarly, governments taking data-driven decisions has not been that present so far. All of you will recall Bush days and pre-Iraq war days. So much data was shown to the entire world to convince the entire world before the war started. So much data collected with so many satellites. What happened? कुछ नहीं मिला. No WMD found. In the introductory session, we were told RBI has the biggest data in the country. तभी तो रुपया ऊपर जा रहा है. जैसे बच्चा कहते हैं ना, माँ को पहले 30% नंबर आ रहे थे, 40 हो गए, फर्स्ट क्लास आ गई, 65 पे पहुंच गए, बस अब 90% भी आने वाले हैं. So data driven decisions. First, one, the quality of data should be good. So if the quality of data is bad, if the intent of use is bad, you can take bad decisions. Let's talk about data cleaning. I will, again, it's not a very structured presentation. I will talk about 3-4 ideas. One is of data cleaning. Countries' databases are very bad. Either they don't exist or they are horrible. PDS, maybe 20-30% is bad. Voter list, again, maybe 20-30% is bad. Most of the money in the country, government money, has been sunk into poverty eradication schemes. So which is the worst database in the country? The BPL database. Which database are we relying on? 2002 database. 11 साल में दुनिया बदल गई. बहुत लोग ऊपर चले गए, बहुत नीचे चले गए. So you kept on moving the poverty line, but people kept on moving at faster pace than you could move the line up and down. So entire government programs, 70-80% of them are directed towards BPL. The data quality is very bad. So ostensibly, UID program has the best database in the country. Ostensibly. Maybe after listening to Mrs. Kanga's lecture, rather than fingerprint impressions, they should have gone with butt impressions. But anyway, I analyzed the quality of data of first 4 crore records of Maharashtra. The word Maharashtra in Marathi was written in 715 ways. Because in phase 1 of UID, where 20 crore records were collected, the names of district, taluka and village were editable. They were not coming from a drop-down list. In this country, we don't have a database of, आज देश में कितने जिले हैं? Nobody knows the answer. 650, 700, 702, 704. You ask different people will answer differently. Postal department अलग जवाब देगी, rural development अलग देगा, revenue department अलग जवाब देगा, income tax वाले से पूछो वो अलग जवाब देगा. So nobody knows the number of districts in the country as of today. So unless you write the names of the places correctly, you can't do anything with the data. It's junk data, absolutely junk data. So in Maharashtra, we are trying to clean up databases, linking them with Census 2011 database. And though I am not here to basically support SAS, but we are using SAS tools in our UID center to clean up this database. And we found really very interesting things. State name was written 715 ways, district name, taluka name, village name. So it needed massive cleaning up effort. And linking up, cleaning up names also. For example, I was showing to my chief secretary that okay, this is the GIS map, thematic map, showing these are the districts or talukas where work is progressing well or not well. Then he said, can you drill down to village level? We drilled it down to village level and it was stunning. A district had done 80% UID enrollment, but there were some pockets which were 5%, 2%. So all UID was happening along highways and railway tracks and all that stuff. Even in Mumbai, there are 2 parallel railway tracks, basically eastern and western. So along the railway tracks, UID enrollment is much higher than 600 meters away from the railway track. That's Mumbai. And so we are now focusing on that. So GIS coupled with place cleaning, it happens. It basically helps. No, a step further away from cleaning up of databases is deduping the data. That's very important in government, and it's really very citizen-centric thing. In the room next to mine in Mantralaya, I sit in 514, so room 516, we have named UID Innovation Labs. I have thrown good software, not only SaaS software, but data flows into my room 516 from UID's Hadoop system, comes into MySQL based state resident data hub, goes to MS SQL database, on the top of it is SaaS. And now we have really fine-tuned that. So I pushed a voter list database of 8 crores into that. And in 3 hours flat, it threw 1 million potential duplicates and a lot of other analysis. A voter list analysis can be really dramatic. If you do demographic curves, polling station wise, assembly wise, taluka wise, zilla wise, and all that stuff, it can really indicate how the migration patterns are happening. In Sindhudurg and Ratnagiri districts, you can actually find the male population is transferring from which to which parts of Mumbai. So demographic pattern matching is very good. A surplus of 18-19-year-old males in a voter list in one particular area can actually indicate stuffing of the voter list. Because it's very easy to make 14, 15, 16-year-old boys stand in the polling booth. Not only once but multiple times. So different, only last week I analyzed our PDS database. We could find number of errors. It came in newspapers also. That's helping us in cleaning up the PDS database. So deduping within the database, that's good. Next is making different databases talk to one another. The results can be absolutely dramatic, absolutely dramatic. How do you make 2 different databases talk to one another? Let us say one health database, or UID database, or a vehicle owners database. There are so many databases. First, the place database has to be correct, linked to census 2011. Otherwise, the whole exercise is meaningless. The city name has to be same, village name has to be same. Best way is to link to census 2011. Next, आदमी का नाम सेम होना चाहिए. So my name in passport is different from my name in voter list, is different from my name in bank. My bank in Maharashtra insisted I must put my father's name inside. So I had to write Rajesh Madanlal Agarwal. Passport, they said no, you should write Rajesh Agarwal. And somewhere they say no, write Agarwal, Rajesh. Somewhere they say no, put initials R. Agarwal. So when you are matching, let us say 2 million records here, 4 million records there, and names are in different shapes, it's difficult. So अभी हमने क्या बोला है कि जहाँ बंदे का नाम है सामने UID लिखो, basic mantra. So all our 70-80 odd databases in the state, all software has been modified to include a column on UID. We are taking different approaches, organic, inorganic, self-seeding, and blah, 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 and to put the UID number in front of the database. And we have started matching the databases. Results can be stunning, absolutely stunning. You match vehicle owners database with the BPL database. पता चलता है भाई के पास Mercedes है और BPL लिस्ट है. I'm not joking. It is true. It is there in the database. Please. MSCP bills, electricity bills. Now, this truly can be a true indicator of BPL list. One can actually stop all BPL surveys in the country and say your electricity bill indicates your lifestyle. बिजली का बिल कम है तो आप गरीब हो, अच्छा तो अमीर हो। मैटर in our sale tax department, we have put up a BI unit. Already it's connected to 12 other databases. Some other state government like excise database, opera database, some central databases like income tax, custom cargo database and so on. And results are quite dramatic. Last year in Maharashtra we got 62,000 crores as sale tax, which is bigger than most of the state government budgets in the country. 100% of it came through e-filing and net banking. That's another story. And we estimate that instead of cash or check or draft, taking money in net banking, the money comes to us instantaneously, it starts earning interest instantaneously, even DD comes to your account after a few hours. And our sale tax department says they earn 200 crore rupees extra just by way of added interest due to net banking. That's a separate matter. But for refund cases, they just saw the MSEB bills they got the database of MSEB electricity bills, they matched that. They found that many people who were claiming refunds, their MSEB meter was zero. Factory band hai, refund claim kar raha hai. They saved 100 crores in Thane district alone. Not doing any raids but sitting in office using a little bit of brain and a bit of database. We matched the sale tax data with the Octroi data of Mumbai Municipal Corporation. Steel bars, a lot of buildings are coming up in Mumbai. A lot of steel is used. VAT compliance was better than Octroi compliance. So Octroi went up. So this we are seeing across the state that VAT compliance, sale tax compliance is better than Octroi compliance. So when you match the two databases, the Octrois go up. आजकल दुर्गा शक्ति का बहुत नाम आ रहा है. You actually don't have to inspect sites to really find out what is happening. For example, mining crushers data. You just see their electricity consumption and you know how many trucks it has crushed. These days it is becoming more and more to steal electricity, more difficult to steal electricity, so those data are becoming more reliable. So matching different databases can yield good results. That's increasing revenues from the government, so that does not really help the citizen. Government के पास बहुत ज़्यादा पैसे आ जाए तो भी सड़क में खड़े रहते हैं. That's a different matter. No? But, so now from citizens' perspective, how does it really help? Now in Maharashtra, more and more things, we don't want citizens to come to the government. As a citizen also, I don't want to really go to government office. Sitting at home, I should be able to do things. And with minimum information being asked from me. So now in almost every application, whatever kind of application form it is, in Maharashtra, you put your UID number, your name, your address, your photo automatically comes from ISRDH. So linking databases helps citizen in saving on data entry. That's one. One of our collectors made a presentation last month in revenue conference where CM etc. were also present. Entire collectors were present. And his analysis was that we call it Satbara, the land title copy. So every farmer, his entire life is running after Satbara copy. So he takes out a Satbara copy every year to see that his own name is there. That Talati has not put somebody else's name. So who is asking for a copy of Satbara? 90% of the time government itself is asking for a copy of Satbara. यार तो डेटा गवर्नमेंट के पास है वो क्यों मांग रहे हो सिटीजन से? पहले सिटीजन उसकी कॉपी निकाले फिर वही कॉपी साथ में जोड़े दूसरे काम करके. So we are saying where government has the data, that data will not be asked from the citizen. So that is how we are linking up databases. So we are dramatically simplifying forms. Where the original form asks for 100 pieces of information, we say ask for 10 pieces of information. Where it says attach 10 annexures with it, we are saying 2 annexures or preferably 0 annexures. And so on. So linking databases helps. Now we are making our form smarter. Let us say somebody comes and to Tehsildar give me a income certificate of 30,000 rupees per annum type of income. He puts in his UID number, his name and other things come up. At the back end, if MSCB database is seeded with this particular UID number, MSCB database can raise an alert कि बॉस इसका तो बिजली का बिल 1200 रुपये महीना है, तो साल की इनकम 30,000 कैसे हो सकती है? So better analytics at the back end, sort of fraud detection. So that we are experimenting with it. It's yielding good results. In healthcare, we talked about yes, predictive analysis based on lot of parameters. Now traffic. In Mumbai as well as in Delhi, I use my Android Google Maps. It gives me beautiful traffic conditions. कि रोड पे ट्रैफिक कैसा है. I see my path in yellow or green or red. So more and more people carry basically Google Maps, GPS enabled smartphones. Google servers get more and more data. So you don't have to put sensors in the traffic lights. Each user is giving Google good enough data to generate good traffic maps. So more data, more power to the citizen in that sense. Now road conditions. In Maharashtra, we have 25,000 state transport buses crisscrossing the 45,000 villages. All tickets are taken on a smart device, printed through a smart device. So अगर आदमी बुढ़ा है या फ्रीडम फाइटर है या कुछ है 50% डिस्काउंट, so that device knows कि ये टिकट 50% डिस्काउंट पे निकला, कहाँ पे निकला, कितने पैसे का टिकट है, so it indicates a starting point and landing point, कितने बजे निकला, indicates the position of the bus. So now we are analyzing this massive data to see कि कौन सी रोड पे बसें टाइम पे चल रही हैं, देरी से चल रही हैं, ज़्यादा स्पीड से चल रही हैं, या बीच में 10 दिन बस नहीं गई इस गांव में कि सड़क टूट गई थी क्या, खड्डे ज़्यादा थे क्या, वहाँ पे रोड रिपेयर की जरूरत है क्या. So the data can be used to basically by some other department, PWD department, to improve the road conditions. So we are doing it. So now data is getting generated, some departments data is getting used, but too much data in government hands can also be detrimental. That's the last point I want to make. My smartphone is a very badmash device. It knows I'm using the Samsung S3 Android phone. It knows that I got up at 6:30 in the morning, मैंने अलार्म लगा रखा था. And it knows मैंने 6:45 बजे उठ के लाइट जलाई, इसमें सेंसर है which sees the light conditions. And then it knows कि मैं 10:30 बजे गाड़ी में बैठा योजना बिहार से, it has a GPS sensor. It knows मैं इतने बजे DIT में पहुंच गया. Basically it was indicating the DIT electronics Niketan building. So Google database knows that this laptop is electronics Niketan building. Now it knows कि मैं आधा घंटा बड़ी शांति से बैठा था. It was lying like this position. It has a gyroscope. So it knows lot of stuff, and it knows I was sitting with many important people. Google database has obviously all their phone numbers and all, including your lat-long position. Since one number of lat-long is almost the same. And since Google has this information, Uncle Sam has this information. So it's too much of information getting generated. And when we come to India, can we really trust the government with too much of our databases? And I have said it openly at many forums that we are very loose with our data. Almost every database in government sector and private sector is available for sale. You just have to have the right connection and the right price. Every database in this country is for sale. So that's why actually I have written to DIT also that Section 43 compliance check must be made necessary in all government projects. which will ensure that your data is safe, sufficient safety practices are there, your privacy is maintained, and all that stuff. There's only the IT Act in the country came in 2000, 13 years ago. There's only one judgment in the country on privacy, only one single judgment, and that was written by me 1.5 years ago as adjudicating officer under IT Act, section 43, 66, 46, etc. And that judgment says that that was basically on an email hacking by a wife into husband's account on a divorce case, etc. So I have said that even if you leave your emails open on your computer, let us say in office, nobody has a right to see your emails. That's hacking. Hacking does not mean cracking or guessing the password. Just like if I leave my key in the door, a thief cannot say you were asking for it. Similarly, if I leave my email box open, or if I put my password on a yellow sticky note and put it on the desktop, nobody has a right to see my emails. Your wife or husband has no right to pick up your phone and see your last dial numbers. That's intrusion into privacy. That's my judgment, seriously. And that has been upheld by Delhi High Court, and now it is a case law. So, while talking of databases, big data, let's keep this in mind. How is the data quality? Is it worth choosing? Is this decision better taken data-driven way, or basically दिल से लेना चाहिए वो decision? Is our data safe? Is our data in good hands? Does it remain private? And so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Agarwal, for bringing out some real issues which are very vital to address the big word which we use, usage of analytics. I think data quality is very vital. To me, a house cannot be strong if plinth is not right. And data quality is the basics and the issues which you picked on, that it is important to do deduplication before you get on to any journey of finding out in terms of what the profiling is and whatever else. It would never give you the right results. And also the associated challenges to do that, especially in a country like ours, where as it is our names are interesting. I can give you my personal own example. My name is pronounced as Sudipto because being a Bengali, everything we speak is with Rasgulla in our mouth. It is written as Sudipta, S-U-D-I-P-T. Don't ask me why. I was born and brought up in UP, and probably when I was writing my name in the class 10th form, my teacher told me, "Aapka naam to Sudipta hai, so it should be S-U-D-I-P-T." I said, all right. So when I actually opened my account, it was Sudipta Kumar Sen, and I live in Bombay and on the Marine Drive. When I applied for my credit card, I wrote a truncated name, which was Sudipto K. Sen. When I applied for my Demat account, the banker said, "You'll have to give me your PAN card, and whatever is there in the PAN card will become the right name." So whoever had entered my name in my PAN card probably knew Bengali or had some association. So he thought Sudipta Kumar, doesn't look to be a, girl's name. So it should be Sudipto. So it happened to be Sudipto Kumar Sen. And by then Bombay had become Mumbai. And Marine Drive is actually NSC Bose Road, which many people do not know. But probably if you ask a taxi driver, take me to NSC Bose Road, he won't know where to take you. But here I have 3 distinct separate identities in my bank, which is sitting out there. So in the absence of what is called an individual record, which normally now banks are insisting on, they will never be able to see me as a single entity. And that's what leads to scenarios like, if I'm a delinquent on my credit card, on the other side, same banker will send me, your pre-approved loan for 10 lakhs is sitting out there, Mr. Sir. And these are realities which are happening in the marketplace. If you look at in the issues with respect to scenarios like what Mr. Agarwal was talking about, that I'm below the poverty line and yet I have a Mercedes. which I'm using. So these are all cases where lot can come out by way of preventing frauds and also with respect to security of the citizen. And you will get to see in the next session on how networks can bring out scenarios like this, which will be demonstrated. May I now invite Mrs. Aparajit to come share her views. Would you like to use the podium?
I'm really, I'm not sure whether I should speak on behalf of data or not for data. But now that I have structured my presentation, I think I will continue to speak on that, which is not exactly the speaking part, but these are the experiences that I'm sharing with you, where I have spent almost 30 years of my service. You know, we basically, we are, as Anand sir has said, we are users of data, but at times we are generators of data also. Like sometimes we conduct surveys, sometimes we are participating in censuses. So all that data, either we are generating, we are using, we are processing, and we are putting it to public domain. What are the challenges of the data? Whether our decision support system is using this data, whether it is worthwhile using this data. I will not talk about that, but I will, being in the industry of generating and using the data, I will just raise my limitations to generate right data, or my attempts to address and reply the queries that are arising out of not so good data. My first challenge is, data and information. Many times we ask, somebody comes to us, we ask, somebody is giving us information, whether it is information or data. Data and information is very easily blending in each other, which is not so. Data has some different sanctity, I believe. Data is not something that is somebody's opinion, some evidence, but these are the facts. Now, which should be in public domain to decide on decide on certain things which can be usable. That is our idea, and that is what a statistician is looking at data. So I just thought, what are my challenges before coming here? I am using SAS, yes. We are cleaning the data, yes. We are generating the data, yes. We are consuming the data, yes. But is it complete in all respects? So I thought, it is not complete, and then I thought I will list out as a user and I will put it to you, what are my problems, whether I am addressing the problems, and then what technology I am using, whether it is sufficient, whether it is necessary, and so on and so forth. So when I was going through that, I thought if my requirement or any decision support system requires reliable, timely and accurate data. Do we have reliable data? Do we have timely data? Do we have accurate data? What system we are using for that? If right data is put at the right time in front of policymakers, I think the decision taken should be to the best of the ability that we can do. Nothing can be 100% right. It is all data, and it is not census. It is not 100% data. Even the censuses, though we say census, it is 100% enumeration, 100% coverage. There are lacunas because always errors, type 1 error, type 2 error, what we call it, arise, sampling error, non-sampling errors are there. But we, to the best of our ability, we should put it in the public domain and to the policymakers, so that should enable them to take the maximum possible right decision. That is the idea we are working with. Because we are practitioners and we are not policymakers, I think the queries raised by all distinguished speakers, I don't know how to reply that, but I will reply it in my own ways. So, basically taking this reliable, timely and accurate data as the baseline for my data collection, compilation, processing of the data and putting it in the public domain. I thought what is required is process improvement. Writing the schedules, processing it, getting the report, customized reports, and then analysis. These are the 4 stages I identified. For data capturing and data analysis. So these are the challenges. After identifying these challenges, what I understood is what is more requirement is process improvement. I will show you how my structure works in my office. My department, I skip the first slide because it is all general, how we are working and what is my job and all that everybody knows. But you know, our basic work when starts with data collection and compilation. This is the chart that we follow, that we have online and offline data entry, then we are compiling it at various levels, then it is coming to our EDP process and the EDP center, and then we are processing it further. Then we are using various techniques like Oracle, SAS and all that, and we are generating customized reports, and we are generating analytical reports also, demand driven. If there is demand from the administrative department, we do that. But now what we thought it was, we have involved ourselves into process improvement, whereby we are using this browser based technology. We are having decentralization of data entry. Now data entry, earlier it was offline at region level, at district level, at village level and all that, and it used to flow. So quite an error is eliminated by having decentralized data entry. Then we are having centralized data repository, which is our EDP center, and we are using SAS, and then we are disseminating the data on website. Now whether this is about data management, that what we are doing about. Based on all these things, whether this is necessary, whether this is sufficient, whether it can be used by everybody, and whether it is correct, not correct, when we were just thinking of the idea of state data bank cropped up, where our IT secretary also guided us and all that. So in Maharashtra state, we are in the process of creating state data bank, where all departments, which should work as a decision support system for the entire policy maker community. Whether it is, then it should be what we thought of is consolidation of relevant data. Data should flow in from all departments, it should be timely, it should be reliable, and it should be accurate data. For that, we are developing modules, then we are giving access to concerned departments to improve upon. We will be giving access to public also, as and when it is totally ready, and with some limitations on that. The whole idea of state data bank was we should have single source of truth, that is one point, access. I think by doing this we are addressing quite a few queries that general perception is data generated for one purpose cannot be used for other purpose. So far so good, it was rightly so, because the objective of submitting the data to some authority, once the objective changes, data becomes irrelevant. With this concept of state data bank, I think once it is in the public domain, once it is well defined, once it is cleaned, approved by concerned authorities, I think only one set of data will be used across the board by all authorities for all practical purposes. And then I think this data, whether it is reliable, whether we should use or not, whether it is timely or not, I think all these queries will be addressed. That is the attempt we at Maharashtra state we are in the process of doing. I think we should be successful in that. Now about unstructured data to put to use, or about quality of data, about principle of data integration. All these things will be addressed in this. Once this data bank will be in public domain, thoroughly functional and addressed, approved and endorsed by relevant departments, it will be obligatory on us, the government, that we have to stick to this data, and there will be only one data source that should be used. Now why there is difference? When we are doing that, we are sitting with different departments, we are understanding their requirements for scheme implementation, program implementation, why they are unable to manage programs, why schemes are failing. So first is whether we are monitoring it properly, what are the requirements, how there are difficulties in monitoring this progress of the schemes because of lack of data. That we are sitting with them, understanding, we are finalizing the definitions, we are finalizing the reference point, we are finalizing the unit of data. We are addressing all these issues so that that data set should be usable and must be usable across the board by all departments and for all practical purposes. That is our point. Now, how we arrive at this state data bank. So all of a sudden, it was not possible for us to put everything in data bank and make it functional. So we are trying to pull in data to certain extent. Sometimes it's information, sometimes it is published reports and all we are putting. But it is we are putting everything. We are trying to put everything at one point, and we are bringing in information from various publications. From various various sources like central offices, then line departments, RBI and all that, whichever we call good database and reliable database, we are just pulling everything in our state data bank. Then we are using censuses and survey data. We are taking some raw information also. If it is important and reliable, we are trying to put it. Something, it is every information we are trying to put at one point of time. This is one aspect that we are at Maharashtra we are developing, and I think sometimes it will be functional and very useful. The basic query that whether it is right or wrong, I can't reply, but I think as a statistician there should be information. How to use it is up to the user. Whether to use it is also up to the user, but as a statistician we should put all the information in public domain. And as sir has mentioned about the Statistical Act, where informant is responsible, at the same time the person who collects the information is also responsible, and the privacy and the secrecy be maintained for the purpose that data is collected. That all these safeguards we are creating, and we are doing this data, state data. After saying that, I would like to put up some nice initiatives that the government of Maharashtra has done. As schemes are designed, so much money is pumped in, we don't know the output, we don't know the beneficiaries or for what purpose it is used, whether it is right or wrong, whether the objective is achieved or not. We have generated this MPSIMS, that is Plan Monitoring System, and the details of which I think we are quite late on this. I should not elaborate, I wrote down so many things, but this is, this plan monitoring system, we can, if somebody is interested, we can sit and discuss. Maharashtra State got award for this system, which is in-house. It is a joint venture between our directorate, that is Directorate of Economics and Statistics, and private partner is BSI, who helped us to who gave us technological support, and we had the domain knowledge. With this system, what are the benefits of this system? I just mention it here. With this system, we are getting real-time expenditure. Normally, after entire year, also we don't know how much we have spent, on which department has spent how much. Now, all these things we are taking quarterly progress, and we are monitoring this real-time expenditure. That means yesterday's expenditure we are able to give to cabinet today, and the schemes can be monitored. It is that good. And we got award on this, so I would like to elaborate certain things. This is automated system developed to pick up object headwise expenditure data from BIMS. BIMS is our budget estimation, allocation and monitoring system. So it's not one-sided that the department is saying we have spent so much on this scheme. Out of this 70% we have spent on child and women and child welfare, or something on projects, something on roads, but it is weighed against actual expenditure from planning, from finance department. We have integrated these two systems, and we get this real-time data. So it was a big achievement. Till then, our state plan books are printed with the help of SAS automatically. Real-time expenditure we are getting, and we are utilizing these techniques. I cannot say we are perfecting, but yes, we have made some efforts, and yes, we are using technology to reduce some errors, some time gap, and to make it more elaborate. It is very timely and reliable. That is what I want to mention once again. Now, what I thought is your other topic was leveraging analytics to improve efficiency. I would not like to speak on that, but what I identified is, we are using all these tools analytical tools in the areas of demography, in the areas of social infrastructure like health and education. We are using these tools for development sectors and subsectors, and eventually it is for overall economy. What I can generate out of this, or we have generated out of this is, this sometimes customized reports and sometimes analytical reports, as I said, based on the demand. We are able to generate, we are able to give all this feedback to departments, and there could be corrective action on that. As this first thing, I don't know whether you are able to see that, but sectoral expenditure, real-time expenditure, we are able to plot, we are able to instantly judge how much we are deviating from our allocation, how much we are deviating from our last year's performance, and everything. So many cubes we have generated like this about the school education. We can drill down up to school level, up to village level, how many schools, how many boys, how many girls, how many tribals and all that. This kind of system we have generated. So when it comes to monitoring the progress of tribals in the school education department, we should be able to have numbers at least along with the school numbers, boys and girls, scholarships to girls, performance of girls. All these things can be tracked down. And once this, I can have data, numbers, as well as I can use analytics and put it. I think it is more vocal than any other data that we are talking about. So this is how we are using various tools to improve our efficiency. I am not saying again we are perfect, but we are definitely making our effort, and it's a steady effort to improve our efficiency. Now, what I would like to say is we are using these tools for our annual plan size. Earlier, these plan books and all are mandatory to print and submit. Description is not uniform, codes are not uniform, totals are not uniform, allocation, expenditure, page total plan total, nothing used to match because it was all manual. Now we are printing, we don't have, it is automatic printing of these books with the help of technical tools. That is what I am mentioning here. So projection of outlay, estimation of revenue, non-plan expenditure, etc. Whatever we have done so far that I am showing, estimation of total revenue excluding whatever you want, we can plot it, we can analyze it, and we can print it without any manual intervention. And we are using this SAS techniques for that. Now the last that I would like to mention, and I am very proud to mention that whenever it is plan size, whenever it is allocation, it is जो ज़्यादा मजबूत है वो ज़्यादा पैसा ले जाता है. There is no technology used. No, I will not blame it, but yeah, I mean there is no technology used, and there is no fallback system. How to monitor that? Whether we are really spending on scholarships, whether we are really spending on girl children, whether they are able to go. There is no monitoring. We are pumping in lot of money. Based on that, what we observed, and I brought it to my economic survey also, that plan expenditure, though it is increasing, capital expenditure also is reducing, and in spite of plan expenditure increasing, we are not seeing the results of that what we have visualized. Then we try to bring down plan expenditure because our non-plan expenditure is increasing, and that is always a fight between us, that is our planning department and finance department. We are always on the argumentative side. So much money is not there, so much money is there, no, we can give only this much and all that. So with one of my secretaries who was also interested in this, we have used this ALIMA model, and to government, or rather to our finance department, we have worked out with the resources and with the liabilities that the state has. Our plan size should be estimated plan size should be 45,370 crores. And eventually, after discussions and negotiations and taking stock of the reliability of the data and everything, our plan size was fixed to 45,500 crores. I think these techniques will help. We have to do little labor, use, and of course cleaning the data. Data is not all that good, but because data is not all that good, we cannot stop collecting and compiling and processing the data. And once everything falls in place, I think we should be able to do much better than what we are doing today. With this faith, I end my thing. I hope I was not all that going away from the thing, but yes, being a statistician, I will say yes, we want data. Thank you.
critical for any decision support systems. And the way you have gone about creating a detailed process is something which is indeed commendable, because eventually process brings the standardization, process brings every time things are being done exactly the same way, which is indeed commendable. Your last observation, that don't wait till such time you have 100% correct data. I think that's very, very critical and important for all of us. It's important that yes, we should get that data to the best of our ability, the best possible data, but waiting for that and not doing things is probably not the right thing. So on that note, I would like to convey my sincere thanks to the awesome panel for wonderful insights which you brought out. And on behalf of folks who are attending this program, I would like to convey my sincere thanks, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our truly power-packed panel. With your permission, Mr. Sen, my job is, when I look at this board, I'm not a tech person, I'm not government, but just an editor who's here to connect the dots. With your permission, I'd just like to connect those dots to our next session and what was said here. I think very interestingly, Mr. Agarwal, you talked about how so many of our major decisions are not data driven. I think in India, I would call it the 3 Ps that probably determine those decisions, which is Patri, politics and parental will. And I think no amount of data or data number crunching can actually replace that in our country. And also, I think one of the things that, to go into the next session, I think would be interesting, would be to say that Professor Anand talked about that data that is generated in the government is done in the process of business as usual. It's just in the conduct of the government's business that we then generate so much data. And what we will see after the tea break now is how you can actually shift the paradigm of business as usual to go on with business as usual. How can you use some of those tools to actually improve the way that the government goes about conducting its business? And with that, I'd like to thank the panel and also request Mr. Sen to please give a small token of our appreciation to the panel. Thank you, Mrs. Rajit and Mr. Agarwal, especially for traveling all the way from Bombay to be here with us today. I thank you all. Thank you so much.